Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Raymore City Council work session for Monday, November the 2nd. Several items on our agenda tonight, the first of which being is the elections facility and safety plan. I'll turn it over to Mr. Fearborn.
And I'm going to immediately turn it over to the Chief of Police.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Fearborn. Well, we were going to do this, 2 weeks ago, but this seemed like probably more appropriate and more timely. And a number of things have happened since then, so I am glad that we waited until this last day before the election. What you all have in front of you are some maps. Thank you to Heather Eisenbarth for putting those maps together. And what you'll see on those maps, if you take a look at the legend, is the places that we have designated no parking, the places that we've designated handicap parking, and where the election workers, bless you, where the election workers will park at all three of our polling locations. So you obviously see Centerview there, backside of Centerview is the rack, and then the church. So just really quickly, some of the things that have happened since we started working on this, Mr. Fearborn, about 6 weeks ago, or maybe more?
Maybe a little bit more even.
Maybe a little bit longer than that, when we reached out to the county clerk, Jeff Fletcher, and indicated to him that we were interested in being prepared for this election. We're hoping that we'd rather be prepared and not have anything happen than the alternative. But as everyone knows, the polls open at 6. Our officers are going to start working at 5 in the morning, and then the polls close at 7, and our officers are going to stay until 9 o'clock. So, based on some past history that we've had at some of the other polling locations in previous elections, that cutting the line off, obviously at 7 o'clock, doesn't mean that you can just walk away and go home. We have to continue to provide traffic control and safety for the crowd and folks like that will still be waiting in line at that time. So we got some information that I felt was interesting from when we met with Jeff Fletcher the first time, were the potential number of voters at each one of those locations that I'd like to share with the council. Centerview, the potential voters is 5,400. The rack is potential voters 5,600, and Fellowship Church, the potential is 5,867. And so this afternoon, I reached out to Amber Larkey, who's the Director of Elections for the County Clerk's Office, and said that of those potential voters registered in Raymore, those active voters that are registered in Raymore, about 4,800 have already voted absentee. So, we're hoping that obviously that keeps the crowds down because a number of people have already voted absentee in advance of the election. The officers that were selected for the assignment received training in appropriate deportment, handling of election polls, including but not limited to those frequently asked questions, recognition of election judges, and referral to those officials, de-escalation and handling of conflict. None of our folks have ever worked polls before. They're not going to be inside the polls, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. But the training was conducted last Monday via Zoom with all of the assigned Raymore PD personnel participating, and in addition to them, some Parks and Rec folks, some Public Works folks, Mr. Fearborn, and a number of other folks who were on that Zoom call in this room with Jeff Fletcher and Amber Larkey and some other folks. So we could just ask questions about, what was appropriate, what we could look for, and all that in the training. The judges will be wearing a yellow Cass County lanyard so that our officers and others can easily identify those folks. And then there was some considerable conversation during the training about individuals who are considered watchers of the election, and then individuals who are considered challengers of the election, who will be wearing name tags and be appropriately identified if you happen to be at the polls and you see those folks. The election folks will be setting up at the city locations tonight, beginning at 8:30 p.m. I think that there was some referee practice over at the rack, and so they weren't going to be able to get in there until that was completed. But we felt that it was important for them, as much as they can get set up in advance and not have to do it the morning of, I think is going to be beneficial to everyone, and we encourage them to do that. And they assured us that the same election workers will remain at their designated poll for the entire day. So, we'll have some consistency of, those questions that might be asked, during during the day of the election. Officers will not be responsible for enforcement of election rules or laws. They will not be inside the poll, so we're not going to be enforcing election law or election rules. We'll be responding upon the complaint of election personnel. So if there's any type of a disturbance, if there's, something happening inside the poll, we'll respond in on the request, at the request of election personnel. We won't be hanging out inside. We'll be outside, traffic control, crowd control, that sort of thing, just to make sure that people are safe and not walking in the street and things like that. Obviously, every effort is going to be made to avoid the issuance of any type of citation. And again, that will be based on a complaint if it's disorderly conduct, disturbing the peace, if there's an assault on an election individual. Those are the types of city ordinance violations that again, we're not enforcing election law, so it would be city ordinance violations that we would be looking to enforce. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion about, firearms inside the polls, and firearms are prohibited by Missouri state law. And so we do have the capacity, as a law enforcement agency to enforce that portion of the state law. So it's not election law, it's just the state law that prohibits carrying a firearm into a polling place on election day. So we do have the capacity to enforce that. One officer will be assigned at each location from, as I mentioned, from 5 in the morning to 9 at night. And that may be a singular officer, or maybe a combination of officers, because that's a really long shift to have one person work the entire time. And they'll have access, obviously, to, radio traffic and, if they need to call for help, if that's the case. As I mentioned, the officers will remain outside the polling place for the duration of their assignment unless they're called inside by an election official to perform a law enforcement function. I already mentioned that it may be a combination of one or multiple officers. We're also going to have a supervisor or an officer in charge who will have responsibility of serving as a rover during the entire election day tomorrow, to provide breaks, to provide that sort of supervision and oversight if those officers have questions or they need assistance of a supervisor. And that rover is either a command or a supervisory level individual who will be going from place to place, during the course of the day. All of these officers will be in uniform. They'll be provided with a vehicle. They'll also have portable radio and any other necessary equipment. And last but not least, any reports, arrest, or other law enforcement action that those officers may take as a result of being in that assignment will be handled by on-duty personnel. I don't want to take the officer away from the poll in order to book an arrest or write a report or that sort of thing. So any type of enforcement action taken by the individuals assigned at the polls will be handled by on-duty personnel if an arrest or any other type of action needs to be taken. So I'm happy to answer any questions. There's been a lot of work in preparation for tomorrow, and we hope we don't need any of it at all.
It sounds like they got it covered pretty good. I found out today that Jackson County's polls will have an opportunity for curbside voting. Have we made the same kind of arrangements for curbside voting and talked about it on how our police might handle that? Because that might get a little crazy as well.
Go ahead.
We'll be out to direct traffic. The Jeff Fletcher and Amber Larkey have assured us. One of the things that we wanted to make sure early in our conversations with them was one way in and one way out of the polls, so that we didn't have people maybe coming in a back door and then people being angry about folks cutting in line and things like that. And so yes, they are prepared, but there is a little bit of a caveat to that I don't think I realized until the training, that it is a bipartisan team that comes out when you vote at curbside. So one Republican, one Democrat, and so they have to free people up in order to be able to do that. And so we're prepared for the traffic part of that, but they are prepared to do that. So they're prepared to do
I didn't know if they were
curbside
going to have designated areas for that.
just to pull up in front, and they're prepared to come to the curb.
There's at Centerview, there's the no loading zone. And
right.
at the rack, they'll use the circle drive.
Okay. All right.
according to Mr. Fletcher, again, that would be one of those where we're just providing the traffic support. It's going to be entirely up to the voting judges to make sure that those go out. Anecdotally, we know that the Secretary of State's office gave all of the election authorities, whatever they're called, the signboards to write if you want to vote from your vehicle, here's the number to call and we'll send the judges out. Okay. But to minimize that, I think we heard from Mr. Fletcher that he does not intend to post those boards. It is on the website that folks can do that.
I know they're converting their absentee voting poll for tomorrow to a COVID-only voting location with people with PPE. Where is our county location for that, do you know?
I believe it's down at the county courthouse, sir.
Is it? Okay. All right. Anybody else have any? Yeah, Mr. Circo.
Are we still going to go into the east side door? Now you said one way in, one way out, Centerview.
Front door at Centerview, back door at Centerview is the exit.
Oh, so front door, exit back.
Right. And the side, you'll notice we've already put, as a matter of fact, Mr. Hickey's going to talk about the facilities issue, so I'm just going to hand that over to him rather than sit here in Babylon.
Thank you, sir. As Chief had mentioned, as part of our planning, we were not wanting to place any of our people in a position where we would be taking on duties of the election judges or anyone from the election authority. And so our focus on the facilities side has truly been outside of the two main facilities, as well as any parking, access issues, and any other support that we can give short of actually helping with the election on election day. With that, at Centerview, what you'll notice is we have turned that into essentially a one-way building where the west entrance will be the entry to the polling place, and then the patio side or the east side of the building will be the dedicated exit. And so we will have foot traffic flow in that direction. We're also planning, as I'm sure many have already seen, for long lines at the polling location, and Centerview is no exception. We are already placing the 6-foot socially distanced X's and placing markers around the circle on the sidewalk so that we can have a line, if it does form, as it goes out of Centerview, crossing in front of the state building and then crossing in front of the empty lots that we have converted into an additional parking lot. This is to reduce the amount of obstruction to traffic around Municipal Circle and on Broadmoor, both east and west, but also allows us to queue the most people into a line if it does form. Based on the county's projections of roughly 5,500 coming through Centerview, that means if everyone were to come through at an equal and orderly pace, that means we're going to have about 300 people an hour. We anticipate that's actually going to be more of a peak and valley, so we know in the morning we're going to have a high peak, and lunch will have a high peak, and probably shortly after dinner we'll have a high peak. Throughout the day, we will have staff from a crew from Public Works, as well as folks from Parks and Rec that will be assisting with the parking at the additional lot in the grassy field. We've also tripled the number of accessible handicap spots that folks can park at. And then we'll also be doing some additional traffic control if it were to come to that during any of those peaks. At the rack, we'll also be expanding the amount of accessible spots, providing, again, another crew of Public Works employees and Parks employees that can assist outside, and then have also placed kind of the socially distant marks all the way down the middle of that sidewalk through the middle of the parking lot to allow for a queuing that'll be the least disruptive to traffic. Additionally, if you've noticed, as you've driven around Municipal Circle or by the rack, we've placed 2 porta potties on outside locations. Again, if we are to have those long lines, we just want to allow, again, a little of assistance, a little relief to folks who may be there standing in line for a while. Also reduces the possibility that someone may have to go inside, so they don't get accused of trying to jump the line or creating any kind of an issue, as we've dedicated that one in, one out one in, one out doorways at both locations. Additionally, at the rack, we have, like other elections in the past, we have closed all of the parking on the south side of Recreation Drive. So as you come off of the roundabout and you're pulling into the park, all of that parking on the pond side or that south side is going to be no parking. So that way we don't have any bottlenecks of traffic there. At the First Baptist Church, or what used to be the First Baptist Church, although that is not our polling location, the park directly across the street, we are again going to be dedicating additional accessible parking spots. One of the things we have noticed here recently as we've wrapped up construction at that park is there is a couple of locations where drivers have inadvertently thought that there is a driveway right where the new stage and kind of gravel area is in the parking lot. And so we're correcting that with some bollards in the future, but in the meantime, we were concerned that without any dedicated traffic enforcement at that park, that we might just end up having a bigger problem. And so we'll be closing that parking area, but knowing that the church there has the 2 large parking lots as well as plenty of street parking, and then our additional dedicated spots will be open there as well. The bathroom at that park will also be open, so if there's any queuing outside, they'll be able, folks will be able to use that bathroom at TB Hanna if necessary. If there are any other questions or comments that you might have about what our facilities plan is, we will, and I forgot to mention this, we will be adding about a dozen trash cans around here at Municipal Circle and outside at the rack, knowing that we want to keep our facilities and the areas around clean. And so just in case anyone needs to use those, we'll have those available as well.
We'll also have those personnel available because we anticipate that the bathrooms inside the rack and inside Centerview are probably going to need to be restocked frequently.
Okay. Yes, Ms. Duggarwood.
Just quick comment and question. It looks like on the picture of the church, what was the Baptist church, it's now Fellowship Church, that they're using a different entrance than normal. Are they going to have lots of signs up? Because usually they use that south entrance and an entrance on the south side, and now they're going to be using one on the west side. Hopefully they'll have lots of signs because that's not what people are used to.
Yeah, that's their facility.
Yeah,
Not our
not
deal.
best.
That's up to the election judges.
Okay, I didn't know.
We
if
don't
I-
want to get on that side of the triangle.
I understand. I just thought, that'll be interesting for people. Like, may cause issues. And then, quick question. So, this sounds like a lot of dollars. Overtime, porta potties. How much is this costing the city?
I would anticipate under $5,000, but we want to protect our citizens and we want to protect our buildings.
Necessarily concerned about the cost. Was just curious because Chief talked about officers work extra on top of our road shift working at each of the poles, and a long day even for our parks and our maintenance people if they're going to be out there for the entire time. It's a longer day for them. So, yeah.
It is. But, and we'd originally approached Mr. Fletcher with the idea that perhaps, well, a lot of this is learning from the past. We ended up in a big fat mess with a big fat bottleneck and a whole lot of angry people, and they don't direct that at the election authority. I can't tell you the number of people that have been in the lobby today or making calls to us because it's at our buildings, it becomes us. So at the midterm elections, you all will remember what happened over at Centerview, and machines shut down and people were angry, and because we didn't shut things down ahead of time, we had a traffic snarl and people couldn't get through, they couldn't get in to vote. We've learned from that. Same thing happened at the rack with the parking, so I'd rather be in front of it and pay some money, and especially at this one with the possibility of people being angry with one another, we want to make sure we're protecting our facilities.
Mr. Barber.
Yes, thank you. Just curious, you give an example of prior COVID election, but if COVID wasn't involved in this, would we have the expense that we are going to have on this one? I mean, is it twice as much? Is it 2/3 as much? Or do you can you spitball it for me?
It would be very difficult to estimate that amount because a lot of the actions that we are taking are actions, as I said, that we've learned from the past and past elections where COVID was not in play. Things like having to direct people, if we're having to spread people out and people are upset because of a mass deal or something like that, we won't know COVID, I don't think, until after the fact. And that will, I guarantee you, masks will become an issue tomorrow. They already are. That we have taken down, as we did with the previous elections, the buildings kind of become, they're under the control of the county as of 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. So we have taken down tonight you must have a mask on to enter the building because Cass County does not have a mask ordinance in place. So people can come in without masks, and if they get upset about that, it's going to be up to the election judges to make a determination on how they're going, because people will say, I'm scared to go in there, you are denying my right to vote. So you have to figure out a way to get somebody out to me, to election judges, on the fly, and if they don't even feel comfortable going in because people don't have masks on. Now, last time that wasn't such an issue, but there are going to be a lot more people coming through there.
Mr. Circo.
I guess to go back on the point for this interview, since we were accustomed to going June and August in both doors, now we're going to make the west door only. So I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of signs, because everybody used to going in that back door. So a lot of signs that lead them around to the
A
front.
lot of signs, and as everybody's kind of discussed in all of the meetings that we've had on this, one of the things we're going to have to realize is we're going to be queuing backwards. So first thing in the morning, depending on how many people are here or who's pitching tents out there right now tonight, first thing in the morning, the people may all be able to get into the building. We're going to have to be prepared for that, to build backwards from the building rather than coming from parking to it. But yeah, there are a ton of signs that are entrance only, exit only.
And when you were talking about masks, if somebody, that would be up to Jeff and them about masking.
nothing
That's all
to
up
do
to
with
Jeff
that.
and them.
Right.
Okay.
And I'm assuming, Chief, you've coordinated with Mr. Fletcher that he won't use our officers as a hammer?
Absolutely.
Okay. Mr. Holman.
To dovetail off Councilmember Doug Watt's point and Councilmember Barber's point, is it our intent, and is it possible to go back and figure out what percentage of this might be COVID related and apply for reimbursement for that portion out of the COVID funds that the county has? And do we intend to do that?
Well, an interesting development, kind of unrelated to this particular agenda item, but I'll go into it. The federal government, passed down through the state and now through the county, is allowing all the way back to March 1?
It was March 23rd.
March 23rd, all public safety related salaries are now considered COVID. So our next reimbursement request will drain all of our money. I'm being very careful about that because it would not be the first time the federal government has changed their mind on something. So we are going to ask for all of our remaining funds and then place them in the restricted revenue fund. And when we get legitimate items that are absolutely known, we put $100 into the restricted revenue fund, and we've got $10 worth of PPE that we buy that we know they have already approved before. We'll draw that $10 out of what's in the restricted revenue fund. We are also going to continue, in case there's reimbursement down the line, we are going to continue to track all of our public safety related salaries, all of them, so that if they come back through and say, okay, City of Raymore, we're now giving you another $2 million, we're already there with the salaries that prove that up. So I think that's probably the most prudent way to go about this, and just in case somebody were to change their mind on those public safety salaries. But right now, we've taken all the money.
Any other questions on this topic? Thank you all. Good report. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
We'll move on to item B, which is a city council review and rules and procedures. And I guess we're not doing Roberts, we're doing Rogers rules. And a sunshine law.
Thank you. Roger's rules.
Roger's rules.
You remember Roger.
I know, Roger.
So, in front of you all tonight, just coincidentally, 3 weeks ago, the Roberts Rules folks issued the 13th edition of, or the 12th edition of Roberts Rules. Up to now, you all have had the little yellow and orange book, which is the 11th edition, and it's in brief. I thought you all would prefer to have the whole thing, primarily because the brief isn't out yet, but also because the new edition, not surprisingly, contains an entire section on how to correctly run a Zoom meeting or any kind of electronic meeting using Robert's Rules of Order. So it seemed very timely considering the presentation for tonight. As I had explained to you all last week, several months ago, the mayor and I started batting around the idea, and the mayor had the idea that it's been a long time since we've had any kind of a review or a 101. There have been a lot of changing things. So he suggested to Mr. Zur that perhaps tonight might be a good night at the beginning of the new fiscal year to go ahead and just kind of give everybody a primer on all of the items that I listed here, including and adding to it the actual Robert's Rules of Order instead of Roger's Rules. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Zur.
Thank you, Mr. Fearborn. Mayor, members of the council, it's a pleasure to be able to present to you this evening. I'm going to provide Mr. Fearborn with the PowerPoint presentation that would normally have been identified for this. There are 10 copies there, so one for you, Mr. Fearborn. The rest should be able to stretch around the remainder of the room. I think I've given this notation every time I've given a training session to the council or to a group or commission of the city of Raymore. I will do my best to attempt not to bore you, but I also assure you I will fail miserably at that effort. So I apologize in advance for that. It's my hope that, and I welcome any input, conversation, and questions throughout the course of this evening. Again, this is not an attempt to be all-encompassing, but an attempt to draw your attention to some topics. And as with everything, the facts of each case should be carefully considered, so don't rely simply upon the notations that you see here in this PowerPoint presentation. I am always welcome to answer questions that you all may have. I will compliment each of you throughout the course of the meeting and the educational opportunity this evening. The council has been fantastic to work with, and so I'll point out a couple of places where that is important. If you all want a deep dive on a particular topic, I am happy to provide the same in the course of follow-up discussions. First item you're going to see is the agenda after the introductory page for that. We're going to cover 7 items this evening. We're going to cover kind of rules and procedures of the City Council, new Roberts Rules, and you've already got kind of an overview of that one. There were 89 total changes that were made during the course of the 11th to 12th edition for Roberts Rules. It is not my intention to go over every single one of them. In looking back through them, and as I started to dig a little bit deeper, I thought it was going to focus more on Roberts Rules and what the changes are and how they will impact you. Ultimately, though, the City Council is still going to have to comply with sunshine, other statutory requirements, and so the Roberts Rules that are outlined for the procedures have some bearing on you, but not as much as you might think with 89 different rule changes. And we'll talk about a couple of those as I go into it. But again, I'm not going to focus a whole lot of attention on it. It's nice to be able to have the Roberts Rules. And if there is statutory provisions or rules of procedure that are in place, those will all trump Roberts Rules, but Roberts will always be the baseline for us to work from. We'll have a little bit of a discussion with regard to your public meetings during the holidays, incompatibility and compatibility issues, a discussion real shortly on the appearance of impropriety. And here I'm happy and very lucky as the city attorney that I don't have very many options or evenings where I lay awake at night. So from my perspective, this is an opportunity to discuss areas that there may not be a violation, but we want to avoid an appearance of any violations moving forward. I'll also talk shortly about social media and sunshine, and then I'll answer any questions. Obviously, I'm happy to answer questions throughout the course of the evening as well. I'm not going to inundate you with handouts during the course of our conversation, but I do want to provide you at the conclusion of this evening with some of the materials that I drew upon for purposes of completing the PowerPoint presentation. The first is a manual for newly elected officials. Many of you may well have already seen this. It's been a while since a couple of you were on the council. I'm not so sure I've actually done a Council Training 101 session. I draw a lot of material from that manual from the MML, and we'll be providing that to you for good future reading. No homework assignments, no reporting back, nothing will be on the test. Also have information from the Missouri Ethics Commission, which covers some frequently asked questions that are kind of helpful and have outlined some of the provisions within the terms of the PowerPoint presentation. But I will present those later on after I'm completed with my presentation this evening. 10 total. Whenever. I'll let you decide. The first area that we're going to talk about, and you're going to find this on your fourth slide, is going to be the council procedure and rules of procedure. You all would have probably received these. If you have not, the council has passed their own set of procedures and rules. These will take precedence over Robert's rules as we go through our discussions and council meetings. A couple of the rules that I want to point out for your consideration as they are being handed out by Mr. Icky. The first is the public hearings provisions under Rule 14. In particular, the order of the public hearing prescribed, and we are trying to go through with each one of the commissions in order to be able to bring them into an alignment with similar public hearing procedures, planning and zoning, Board of Zoning Adjustment. We had the opportunity a couple of months ago to sit down with the Board of Zoning Adjustment and go through a mock hearing, a mock meeting where I took the position as chair and walked through a contentious hearing. We had Mr. Cataret, who provided the role of an angry neighbor, and we had Ms. Jardot providing the position of staff for the evening. The council has already passed rules of procedure that would allow for public hearings. Note on here a couple of things of highlight. First, subsection A provides for confirmation that required notice has been given. That will generally be by staff ultimately, so staff will generally cover in their staff report that notice has been given and confirming that the notice was given and published. The other two portions that we have not generally been following are D and E, which cover statements by those in favor and statements by those in opposition. And according to the rules of council procedure, it would appear that you could identify out or designate out. First and foremost, we're going to take all those people who are in favor of this particular item or this particular application, come forward and speak on to us with regard to this, and then separately invite forward, when there's no one else to speak in favor, those individuals in opposition. Obviously, you can all change your rules of procedure at any given time and adopt differing rules, but that might be something to consider for future purposes of having the public hearing to help make a clear distinction between those in favor and those against. I would also note that in recent conversations with the Planning and Zoning Commission, from legal's perspective, I'm comfortable with the council inquiring as to witnesses who are residents versus non-residents of the city of Raymore, and that allows you all to provide the level of weight that goes along with it. This generally isn't going to come into play when you're dealing with many of your developments, but perhaps would if we're dealing with areas that are surrounding and borderline of the Raymore jurisdictional areas. Before I move further, I want to note here, it's been a couple of years since I updated my Council 101 training materials and PowerPoint presentation. I'm pulling all stock photos for these things, so if you have concerns with regard to the stock photos, I'm trying not to run into any copyright infringement or other issues here. So may not be totally applicable, but it also covers my bases. Yes, Councilman.
Just for clarification, so you're talking about public hearings. If we go to the more formal of adoption of the mayor or Mayor Pro Tem, whoever's in charge, you're talking about the public hearing section only. So in other words, our discussion could be back and forth as always. It would simply be, if we go to that model, the mayor or presiding officer would ask for those in favor first and then those opposed, so adding in kind of another layer of administration just to the public hearing and the folks from the public that want to speak, correct?
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. And I can go down through the course of the public hearing, but in reviewing back through the rules of procedure that have been adopted, I just noted those as some interesting differences between how we've been operating and how it actually shows under the terms of our rules for potentially operating. So yes, that's right. It's only with regard to the public hearing portion.
Jonathan, that only applies to council rules and procedure.
That's correct.
Just to let the council know, I think I may have mentioned this to you last week. Mr. Zur is also going to be giving this same primer to all of our boards and commissions. You all's is obviously significantly more detailed than what they're going to be hearing, but some of these will kind of overlap with it. We thought it was a good time for everybody to kind of get briefed back up on these things.
Any other questions at this point? Okay, moving forward then, if you look on your sixth slide, I've got the Raymore City Council Rules of Procedure. These are specific motions that are outlined under Rule 8 of your Rules of Procedure. I'm not going to dwell on all of them by any stretch. You all understand the main motion, the motion to withdraw. With regard to a motion to amend, obviously you're changing language of the original motion, underlying motion, requires a second. It's a debatable and amendable provision. It requires approval of the majority of the members of the council. Interestingly, technically under Robert's rules, once a motion has been made and seconded, a motion to amend is required even if the language that's being sought to be amended is from the original individual who made the motion. So if you're going through the process and you have a motion and a second, and the person who made the original motion decides, oh, I want to make an alteration or change to that, it would require a motion to amend in order to go back and do that. It wouldn't just be someone from one of the other council members. The motion to postpone consideration, this is if there is additional information that's required for the council to take action, similar to a motion to table or a motion to continue, and it would require a majority vote of the council to approve that. Motion to limit, extend, or close debate. Again, if you're seeking to close debate, the motion acts as the same as calling the question ultimately. Council has the ability to alter the timing of debate or the amount of debate, though generally the mayor will make sure that differing viewpoints are heard, but the motion that's presented here is for the council to step in and either extend the debate time frame or to limit the time frame. Under the terms for the motion to recess, the motion can be heard, motioned and seconded. Ultimately, the mayor gets the final call on how much time you get for your particular recess. And then a motion to appeal a ruling of the chair. The appeal of the ruling of the chair can be made. The mayor, of course, will be running the meeting. Staff can provide guidance on parliamentary procedure, but ultimately the mayor makes the call. If you don't like the call, you can challenge the mayor's determination on the procedure for appropriateness and fairness. It does require a second, and it does require a majority vote. You also have a motion to reconsider and a motion to rescind. I'm not going to spend too much time on that one other than the motion to rescind would be undoing a prior action of the council. That would require a 3/4 vote for approval. And if it fails, then no further motion to rescind would be allowed at that particular meeting. I want to point out for the point of procedure, and this would be addressed to the mayor, it does not require a second. It's not debatable. It doesn't require a vote. It inquires as to the proper procedure. I think that we've in the past heard it as a point of order, but it's actually point of procedure under the terms of your rules of procedure. This would be if you had questions about the best way to present a proposed motion. For example, we recently had a Planning and Zoning Commission meeting where a motion was made in the negative, and I would generally say, and I'd prefer that they not be presented in the form of a negative if I'm able to avoid that. But ultimately, you could ask the question, is it appropriate to ask this or present this motion in the form of a negative? That would be a point of procedure to bring up. Point of privilege is, again, not voted upon, not debated, no second required. That would be if you all can't see, hear, or you don't have material. That would be, basically, it's a cry for help. Hey, I can't hear what you're saying. Point of privilege. There you go, sir. There you go. Moving on, and the last slide with regard to City Council rules of procedure. A couple of things to point out. First, and I've moved to slide 7, any request by a council member to remove an item from the consent agenda shall be honored. Any item that's been pulled under the rules of procedure would technically be moved down to the first item under new business, according to the rules. And unless objected to by a council member, the presiding officer, mayor in this case, or mayor pro tem, may call for any item on the agenda be taken out of order or removed. So you've got those as options for time management and time control. If you were not able to be present during the course of a meeting for purposes of approving the minutes, if you reviewed the meeting video, made yourself familiar with the actions that took place at that meeting, there's no reason for you to necessarily pull an agenda item from the consent agenda for minutes purposes. And I think most of the time I've had the council members who have indicated, hey, I watched the video afterwards, do I need to recuse or pull that from it? And the answer is no.
Mr. Zer?
Yes, sir.
Would it be accurate to say that this might be one that the council wants to consider in the future too? Because you all may remember, we have often had an item pulled because somebody wanted to vote on 4 of the 5 items but did not want to vote on the one, and we have voted on the one within the consent section again, rather than moving it to new business.
And-
It's a whole lot cleaner the way you all have been doing it, so you might want to consider in the future that when we revisit rules and procedures, that you want to redo that wording so it's not always moved to the first item of new business.
Yes, sir.
When is the appropriate time if the council were so inclined to change a rule like that? When, we haven't done that since I've been here that I know.
We could probably put on for when the snow is flying at a work session to have Mr. Zur come back for an encore performance just on rules and procedure, and whatever you guys would like to see the wording changes on, I think that's valuable to revisit on a regular basis.
That sounds exciting, and I look forward to that opportunity. And I slightly got hung up over the notion of moving it down to the new business at first, and then I moved on to the second item, which is the mayor can control the location of items and rearrange items in the agenda. So my concern was alleviated when I note on there that, hey, we've been removing items from the consent agenda. We haven't been moving them down to do new business, but it's entirely within the discretion of the mayor to make the determination as to where they go. Happy to make the rules match the procedure, though. Moving on, next item on our agenda was the new Roberts Rules in time of COVID, and unless there is a statute, ordinance, adopted rule of procedure, then Roberts Rules, not Rogers Rules, will control the debate of the council. And the next slide that you'll see is slide number 9. Again, there were 89 changes that occurred in the most recent addition to Robert's Rules. That'd be volume 12. Many of these were adopted to allow for governing bodies to utilize electronic meetings. They were allowing for officers and directors to make decisions through electronic means, and then allowing executive boards to pass that along to their committees. There were specifically 3 new rules that were adopted post sending the volume 12 to the press that were COVID related, and they were mostly applicable to not-for-profit and corporate governance. Again, staff is always here to answer questions on procedure and the application of Robert's Rules, and we stand ready to do so. Really, from this section on Robert's Rules, I want to make sure and point out a couple of things. First, the more I dug into the 89 changes, the more I identified that they were really less applicable to the council based upon provisions for sunshine and other regulatory requirements that you're required to comply with. Overall, though there's a relatively limited impact, I did want to take the opportunity to applaud the council, staff, and specifically Mr. Fearborn for the methods instituted during the COVID, allowing the city to continue the operations, to be responsive to the needs of the citizens, and to still allow for input and due process for citizen involvement. And it's critical for the ability of the citizens to continue to maintain involvement with their governance, and I think we were able to do that. If you were to look through the Roberts Rules and the changes that were associated with it, I think you'll find that mostly what we did was comply ourselves with Roberts Rules in the time of COVID, even though we didn't have those to rely upon at the time. So again, congratulations to staff and applauding staff and Mr. Fearborn for that effort. With regard to Robert's Rules, I will simply leave you with one other quote, and this comes from the Manual for Newly Elected Officials, and I'm not going to hand that one out to you quite yet. But the Manual for Newly Elected Officials provides a quote that I thought was good. Parliamentary procedure is designed to ensure that the will of the majority prevails and that the right of the minority to be heard is protected. In the hands of the presiding officer, it should be a tool, not a bludgeon. Not only the mayor, but all members of the council should be familiar with the rudiments of parliamentary procedure so that decorum is preserved, business is expedited, and citizen respect is maintained. I think that's why we will always continue to rely upon Robert's Rules, and again, answer any questions that you might have about that. Any questions about Robert's Rules or the changes or the new book that you have to put on the shelf and to refer to regularly? If not, we'll move on to the next section, which is public meetings during the holidays. Public meetings during the holidays, and you all will have the opportunity to participate in holiday parties and be involved with activities outside of the council work. Many of you will probably be asked about what's going on with the council during your holiday parties, and I wanted to make sure and cover this area on a timely notion. My first slide that you'll have in there is slide 11. It's sunshine with a chance of holiday cheer. Remember, sunshine law is always overpowering and always looking over your shoulder when it comes to your activities outside of a public meeting or in your public meetings. Section 610.020 encompasses the main portion of Sunshine. It provides that all public governmental bodies shall give notice of the time, date, and place of each meeting and its tentative agenda in a manner reasonably calculated to advise the public of the matters to be considered. And if the meeting is to be conducted by telephone or other electronic means, the notice of the meeting shall identify the mode by which the meeting will be conducted and the designated location where the public may observe and attend the meeting. Again, this goes back to my gratefulness for staff being so ready to address the issues during COVID for our electronic meetings and making sure that we were able to provide a location where the council could conduct its meetings and still involve the community and citizens at the same time. So kudos during that. Thank you, sir. If we are forced to return to a shutdown position, as they are in some European countries, again, I think staff will continue to push for compliance with the requirements above, including public observation and public attendance. Moving on from that, you had the notation of public meetings. What all does a public meeting include? A public meeting of governmental bodies is subject to 610.010 to 610.030. It's a public meeting where public business is discussed, decided, or public policy is formulated. And I've moved on to page 12 now, or for slide 12. So public business is discussed, decided, or public policy is formulated, whether such meeting is conducted in person or by means of other communication equipment. I've highlighted on the slide the term that public meetings do not include any informal gathering of members of a public governmental body for ministerial or social purposes where there is no intent to avoid the purposes of this chapter. That means that public meeting would include a public vote. So 3 factors that I want you to take away from this is it a public meeting that we should be concerned with? 1, is there a quorum of a public body present? 2, are we discussing the public business? And 3, are decisions on public policy being formulated or decided upon outside of it? That is where a public meeting is taking place. Your 13th slide covers some case studies on this issue. And it shows you a good side and a bad side of a public meeting based upon case law. The first case is Colombo versus Buford. The other case is Kansas City Star versus Shields, and I've had Kansas City Star versus Shields in my Planning Sessions 101 for a number of years now, I think going back to about 2015. But ultimately, it's the way that we don't want to be conducting business. And what I would say with this is, when it comes time for the holidays and your get-togethers and where you enjoy things, first and foremost, enjoy your Christmas parties. Drink responsibly. Don't let your lutefisk sit out overnight. And above all, don't vote or create policy over eggnog. You'll find that under the Colombo versus Buford provision, you've got individuals who met socially in one of their homes. There were district representatives who were present with other people from the community. The gathering was unstructured. There was no identified agenda. There was no gavel to call to order. No one was taking turns to speak. The discussions were of a general educational philosophy only. No votes were taken and no specific policy was established. This was given the gold star as far as the case was concerned by the courts on whether or not there was a violation of Sunshine or the provision of a public meeting taking place. On the opposite side of the spectrum is Kansas City versus Shields. In this particular case, the attorney for the city rented a room at the Fedora's restaurant, at which time she had individuals come in, including the chairman and 2 members of the City Council Finance Committee, the city manager, and the city budget director. During the course of that meeting, handouts were provided to the individuals. A memorandum, similar to minutes of the meeting, was drafted after the fact. The following day, the committee unanimously adopted a budget agreement which looked very similar to the handouts that were provided during the course of the meeting. Suspiciously similar, I guess I should say. Matters discussed were very specific, they were significant, they were sensitive and controversial budget matters, and there was a quorum of the committee present at the time. In this particular case, I want to make sure and point out that the attorney who was handling the city actions at that particular time was responsible for organizing the meeting and helping to establish the location and all. The civil fine was imposed against the attorney who organized the meeting and reserved the room, and I would greatly appreciate it if this council would not put me in that similar position at any given time in the future. I would also note that the council cannot play telephone game for information on votes. So if one member transmits an email to another individual and that individual transmits an email to another individual and it all has to do with the same thing, once you hit your quorum or your majority of individuals, you've officially created yourself a public document. There has to be procedures in place to make sure that it is referenced as a public document. This will lead a little bit into the notion of protecting your email accounts, private accounts versus city accounts. And we'll cover this a little bit more in the training session as we move forward. But there are ways to make sure that your personal email accounts are not subject to subpoena for the future. Generally, that's going to be utilizing your raymore.com account as often as possible. Any questions so far? Yes, sir. There was a quorum present in that case, and I should have noted it. A quorum adds a factor to consider. As far as I'm concerned, it raises a potential for concern, but it doesn't necessarily alter the outcome. Your quorum can be present without violating anything as far as sunshine is concerned, as long as no one is discussing the city business, or in this particular case, the business of the commission. Good question. Very good question. Yes?
Thank you. Question about, what if a committee only has 3 members? So anytime 2 of them are talking to each other, it's a quorum.
I think that
know that.
poses a real concern. That's absolutely correct.
But that's not something that we have to deal with, so
Yep.
thank you.
Okay. Okay, moving on. Compatibility, my section 4. Incompatible offices, and this is holding more than one public office. And as members of the council and mayor, all of you are identified as leaders of your community. Many of you will be asked to serve on HOA boards, on boards of Rotary, Kiwanis, Chamber of Commerce, whatever they might be. And this is a question of whether or not you can hold those positions. Now, most of them are going to be voluntary positions, but sometimes work will be involved in this as well. And the question is, what can be impacted with regard to holding more than one office? Most of my conversation this evening will be focused on holding multiple offices of elected or appointed position, but something to consider with how many hats can I wear, and am I going to be running into a conflict if I'm serving on one particular board that's going to be presenting issues to the city council. In law school, we had the discussions of how many hats one person could wear without creating a conflict. And in this regard, I would compliment the mayor, as he regularly has asked questions to make sure that any of his involvement in civic as well as law enforcement activities will not be a problem. So thank you very much, Your Honor. Appreciate that. With regard to incompatibility, charter will control some of this. Section 3.6 and coincidentally Section 4.6, which addresses the mayor, provides for provisions for incompatible offices. It provides specifically that except where authorized by law or pursuant to an agreement between the city and an entity of government, no council member shall hold any other compensated elected governmental office or any city employment. Again, Section 4.6 provides this for the mayor, and these are all mirrored under Section 111.040 of the Raymore Code of Ordinances. What this means from our perspective under our slide 16 is there are certain roles that have been identified as incompatible. So for example, the mayor cannot also be on the county commission. This is pursuant to Missouri Ethics Commission and Missouri Attorney General opinions. A trustee of a village cannot also serve on a fire protection district board. A presiding county commissioner cannot serve as a city alderman. Those are specific cases that I'm drawing from there. Interestingly, nothing prohibits an individual from being a candidate for multiple incompatible positions. It's just not capable of holding those incompatible positions. As such, you could be a member of the city council and decide to run for county commission, but if you win and accept the commission seat, your membership on the council will automatically terminate. I find this interesting that without any legal step being required in order to be removed from it, the minute you accept the position as a county commission level individual, you've terminated your position as a city council member. I'd note that the doctrine of incompatibility does not apply when it relates to a husband, wife, or spousal position holding 2 different locations. So individual spouse who serves at the county commission absolutely can do that and still have their spouse serving at a mayor level. The ultimate decision making, and I've highlighted the factors on your slide 16, factors to determine incompatibility are the duties of each office inconsistent antagonistic, repugnant, or conflicting. And 2, is one office subordinate or accountable to the other through the following: either supervision over that office, authority to remove individuals from the lower office, or an ability to conduct a financial audit of the individuals at the lower office. Again, happy to have the conversation. Hey, if I serve on this position at this level, am I in conflict? Am I going to have an issue? Feel free to talk with myself, Mr. Fearborn, any of the individuals on staff. Any questions about that? Okay. Next, I'm going to move on to appearance of impropriety. I'm going to skip a couple pages over. You're going to move over to page number 18. This came up as a recent issue, and I'm not going to get into the realm of the political because there's always a fair argument on both sides of the story, and I want to make sure and represent that. But this came out recently in the Fulton Sun and around the state with regard to the appearance of impropriety. And in this particular case, you had Nicole Galloway, current state auditor, who came out with a report of then AG, Missouri AG Josh Hawley, regarding the conduct of his position as the Missouri AG. The notation in the course of the report was Mr. Hawley didn't commit any wrongdoings under his job. Yes, there were identified concerns with regard to not noticing a particular meeting or security detail and travel itineraries that would normally have been identified, but ultimately no wrongdoing was conducted. What there was an appearance of impropriety. And there, what I would suggest to you, and this gets a little bit mushy, and I understand that, is the notion that the appearance of impropriety can sometimes be as bad as the actual impropriety itself, especially in today's society. So I caution you on that one, and I'm going to go into a little bit of the conversation here. Now, again, on the opposite side of this, Mr. Hawley's office came back out and specifically made the notation that Ms. Galloway was utilizing her position and her inquiry and her audit for partisan political gain, and there's investigation by the Board of Accountancy on this. But ultimately, what shows up in the Fulton Sun on February 6th of 2020 is the auditor appearance of impropriety existed in Hawley's use of state resources, not the way you want to have your name presented in the public forum. The next page on page 19 would show you what the Manual for Newly Elected Officials provides. City officials should be aware that the appearance of evil can be as harmful as evil itself. It goes on to indicate that it is both the evil of an individual occupying a public position using the trust imposed in him and the position he occupies to further his own personal gain, and the appearance of such evil that the law seeks to eradicate. Again, lucky that we do not have to discuss violations given the high caliber of our particular council. So I'm left discussing a more mushy area of public service where the perception of wrong can sometimes be the wrong. It's enough to be perceived as having committed the wrong. And again, this will be viewed from the eyes of the complainant, not from the eyes of the elected official. If you've got questions on an action, please feel free to talk with counsel or with staff and legal counsel for the city, and we're happy to direct you. What I've provided in the next couple of slides are 3 individuals who I would identify as less than astute public servants who got in trouble with the MEC based upon a report. And again, the report comes back in and it says the commission at this time does not find any reasonable grounds for a violation of conflicts of interest or otherwise, but it does go on to indicate that the appearance of impropriety was of a concern. The first one you'll see under the 20th slide here, Mr. Lee, in this particular regard, was serving on a board for the Northeast Ambulance and Fire Protection District. That entity got sued, and he was named specifically. The entity paid for legal defense for the entity as well as for Mr. Lee. The case was eventually dismissed after an appeal, and there were references with regard to the payment of attorney's fees. Ultimately, the district paid Mr. Lee's attorney's fees as provided by the district. However, when the approval for payment of Mr. Lee's attorney's fees came up, he in fact voted to approve paying his attorneys the $16,000 to cover his fees. Again, the MEC came back in September of 2011 and said, you voting for that was not necessarily wrong, illegal, or a violation of the conflicts of interest provisions under Section 105 of the Revised Statutes of Missouri, but your action of voting on the $16,000 settlement to pay attorney's fees resulting from litigation against you creates the appearance of impropriety and should have been avoided. You are admonished to avoid such conduct in the future. Again, words that we are all looking to try and avoid if at all possible. The 21st slide that you'll see is another similar example of this. Again, a less than astute public official. At this particular case, the individual at issue was a chief of a fire district whose wife sold benefit packages. Chief of the Fire Protection District, wife was an independent marketing director for a company selling benefit packages on commission. The chief wanted to be able to sell to individual firefighters and their wives, both within his department as well as to other fire departments or local agencies within the county. At this point, he had specifically requested input from the MEC on this, and the MEC went back to language which appears regularly in their determinations and their opinion letters, which is, at times, it is very hard to distinguish the difference between the appearance of impropriety and, in fact, a technical violation of the conflict of interest statutes in the eyes of the public. The intent of the law is that conflict of interest be avoided. The Commission encourages you to recognize that you should not use your position as Chief of the Fire Protection District for private gain. So again, we're going back to similar language with regard to the appearance of impropriety, despite the fact that there is no actual violation. The last example that I've provided to you, a little bit better than the prior two, but still a notation here as to the appearance of impropriety. And when in doubt, I would always invite you to ask the lawyer. I'm always impressed with Councilmember Abdel-Gawad in this regard. There have been a couple of occasions where she's had the opportunity to vote on budgets, as well as provisions for increases in step pay. With her husband working for the police department, she's asked me on a couple of occasions if that qualifies, and my answer has generally been, has always been no, it is not, because you're talking about a global change in individuals as they are moving up, not a specifically one dedicated specifically for her spouse. So thank you very much, Councilwoman. Appreciate that. And again, the legal counsel will be happy to advise anyone with regard to conflicts or questions of this. In this particular case, you see the information from the MEC, July 2008 case. The alderman lived within a redevelopment area. He cohabitated with a female owner of property within the redevelopment area, and a question was raised as to the existence of a conflict of interest if he participated in discussions related to acquisition and purchase of properties and negotiations over that redevelopment area. The alderman wisely agreed not to participate in any vote relating to the property that he actually lived in, but the question went further as to whether or not he was able to vote on anything within that redevelopment area. And again, the MEC comes back with similar language, but they've added to it with this one. From the facts presented, the question of whether a conflict of interest exists by its very nature may involve two issues. A, whether the statutes require that the public official recuse or disclose interests, and B, whether a public official should recuse or disclose interest when an appearance of impropriety exists. The answer to the first is governed by statute. The answer to the second question depends upon the judgment and discretion of the public official themselves. That generally covers your appearance of impropriety. The next page that I've got that I've provided for you, and I'll stop there if there are any questions. Yes, Councilman.
Questions. You got me thinking here. So if a council member, has lunch, coffee with a developer about opportunities within the city and directs that individual and says, yes, there's plenty of opportunities and here's where they are and here's what you can possibly do, and then directs that person to staff, and then that matter ultimately, goes through the proper channels, application, P&Z, and it comes before council for vote. Is that you now have to recuse yourself, or is that?
That would not be. You are not in a position where you gain financial benefit from that. There's no pecuniary gain that would go to you. I would suggest to you most of the time you're going to be in a listening position, and your only direction that you're going to be giving after that is not, hey, here's a great idea. It's going to be, we've got A-plus staff that is more than happy to help walk you through the process that would be needed in order to institute that development.
Similarly, when I have individuals, who are just investors in the community, says, hey, I would like to do such and such over here. Says, that sounds great. Here's staff's phone number.
You never go wrong by handing out the business card of staff.
Okay.
And the council, all of you have been absolutely excellent about, you burn the phone and email lines up to me the second you get called by. It happened 2 weeks ago. And you burn the phone lines up to me if there's going to be any contact like that. And you all have also been very, very good, if you have met, in announcing that you met informationally only with a particular developer A if it came to that. So no worries there.
Excellent. Thank you.
Any other questions? Very good. Moving on, I do have one slide in here with regard to gifts and favors. I think it probably goes without stating not to accept gifts, favors, or otherwise from individuals in the community for doing your job as council members. I would note, though, little caveat here, it does not apply to the occasional non-pecuniary gift, and I've gotten questions on that one in the past. Insignificant value or awards that would be publicly presented in recognition of service or gift that would have been offered or given based upon the fact that you were an elected official. So if you're identified as a elected individual that is going to be given an award by an organization, an entity, or otherwise, that does not necessarily mean that you are receiving a gift or a favor that's going to be a violation. Again, I'm happy to talk with each of you about that if you are awarded or designated to potentially receive a gift from individual entities within the community. Questions about the gifts and other favors? Moving on to our last subject is social media and sunshine. I come back to sunshine again on this one. I'm going to skip on over to page 25, social media panacea or pandemic, and again, simply a notation for you here. For politicians and their staffs today, social media is a veritable minefield. From racy photo leaks to viral campaign hashtags and lawsuits over blocking followers, social media platforms offer elected officials access to a massive audience, but at a price. This comes from a Practical Pointers article on social media guidelines for public officials, dated July 18th, 2019, by Trey Hanbury and Hogan Lovells. They provided also within the course of their article some best practices, and I've identified a number of those on slide 26. First and foremost, from a best practices standpoint for social media, if you all are maintaining Snapchats, Twitter, Facebook, even email accounts would apply to this. First, do not post offensive photos or content and institute a review process before any post goes live. I would identify here as the scenario or the example that they gave in the course of the article was Representative Anthony Weiner, who tweeted sexually suggestive photos to a young college student from his public account and was forced to resign 3 weeks later. 2, choose wisely when delegating access to your social media accounts. In this area, they suggested the establishment of personal accounts and public accounts as being separate. They suggest posting to the public account only at certain times, places, or from certain devices so that you can avoid and have a clear distinction between I am posting to my public account versus I am posting to my personal private account. 3, think twice about what you retweet, like, or share. Again, reposting can open liability for copyright infringement or defamation. Minimize the risk by only sharing posts from established institutions, respected online media outlets, and other reputable sources. 4, establish a clear viewpoint-neutral policy for deleting offensive comments and avoid blocking users with whom you disagree. Now, this plays back in Missouri even because we've got examples of President Trump, former Governor Greitens, and even Governor Parson have all gotten in trouble and sued over blocking users from their public accounts. The official social media pages maintained by government employees are a public forum. Blocking or banning constituents because of their viewpoint would violate the First Amendment, is what the case law has come out to say. This has gone on as recently as August 19th of 2019. I found an article in Jefferson City, Missouri, a court report finding that an individual state lawmaker, her page constituted a public forum, according to a federal judge in Missouri, based upon the fact that she was, and therefore she was violating free speech by blocking individuals from her Twitter account. So if you have those accounts and you want to talk with council about what these mean and how we are able to institute a way to identify a public account versus a private account, again, happy to have that conversation. I think it's going to be a topic that becomes more and more discussed as time goes by. The last real section or slide that I've got for you is page 27. Again, these are things to do and things to don't. I would identify this as ways to keep your personal information from being subpoenaed and made a part of the public record versus maintaining your separate account. Here, I've got notations, and again, these are all recommended by the articles on it, for posting a disclaimer on your personal account that identifies the account purposes and that the opinions are yours and yours alone. I'd limit the amount of the account contact for personal use. Don't use your city-provided devices and your city-provided emails for purposes of providing personal information. All of those are ways to avoid having your personal accounts be identifiable for public intake. Happy to answer any questions with regard to social media at this point.
Jonathan, given the fact that now we have, and recently the scandal with the CNN reporter on a Zoom meeting, is there, we talked about digital media meetings with regard to, as far as social media, is that, do you intend to include any warnings about that?
I am happy to do that, though we have not had any troubles with individuals so far. Everyone, as far as our council meetings, as far as I could tell, everyone was in a location where there was not offensible items in the background that we would be concerned with. Everyone was fully dressed, I believe. During the course of our city council meetings, that makes a huge difference, particularly in the most recent articles on that. If you'd like a deeper dive, I am more than happy to provide that with regard to Zoom specific. At this particular point, we're still able to have, with plexiglass and otherwise in hand, the social distancing in-person meetings. But if we have to revert back to Zoom, I am more than happy to provide an overview of those provisions.
There are still a lot of meetings that I attend that are on Zoom, and of course they're recorded. And I would think that when we know we're in those meetings, we want to act and talk appropriately. Some people will sometimes think that it's muted, whether it's video or audio. And they have to be very careful because those meetings are also recorded for purposes of posterity or for minute taking, and those can be used as well in the future for potential suits. If somebody were to slander somebody else, say a member of the community, were having a meeting between mayors or whatever, I mean, I would think that would be still something that we have to be very careful about.
All excellent points and worthy of inclusion if we're going to establish procedures and policies with regard to Zoom meetings. Happy to work with you on doing that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody have any questions? Mr. Barber.
Thank you. To that point, you know, we didn't really have much other than we decided we could do meetings via more of a conference call type things. I think, honestly, in lieu of what happened, that's something we ought to really take a hard look at and massage that and figure out what we need to do in the future, because when we decided to do that, there was a little heartburn on, you know, you really need to be here part of the meeting, and that really the intent was not to have a COVID, you know, where we're all gone. It was more of one or two or one. But I think that is something we need to look at and really dig deep in, because I think, not counting what we just went through, the experience ought to tell us we need to be prepared.
I think it'll be good to have policy match the procedure that was instituted, and I think we will be able to do that. I think we have complied with all the provisions, at least provisions for providing for public meeting opportunities. As long as we have a location that individuals from the community are able to attend or participate in the meeting, even if we are telling them that it's not recommended that they do so, it's still an important factor for us to have in order to maintain compliance. And I think you're right, it's probably time for us to look at our policies and procedures with regard to electronic meetings.
The same way that Robert's Rules of Order is looking at it and has made changes, perhaps that would be a good section to be added to the rules and procedures of the council when we visit that here in the next couple of months.
Yeah.
Mr. Townsend?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. On similar vein, if you could refresh my memory on inclement weather, and, you know, should that occur and we have to, you know, postpone council meetings, would we have the ability to do a virtual meeting to kind of keep the schedule in place?
My only concern with that one would be the notice provisions, because we were giving very clear notice as to how that meeting was going to be conducted. And so if we've got an inclement weather at a last minute, it's going to be hard for us to adjust the notice provisions. Not saying that we couldn't try and figure out a way to do it, because notice does provide us with pretty broad spectrum there. It has to be as soon as you're capable of making changes to the agenda as to how it's going to be conducted. But that would give me pause for concern, at least initially. Not something that can't be overcome, but something to be analyzed.
Excellent. Thank you.
The basic notion that even though the meeting is virtual, the meeting has to take place in a place. There has to be a physical location, and you'll remember we were very, very careful that even when everyone else was gone from the meeting and attending virtually, the mayor was always in attendance at the posted place. We actually had that come up with the Arts Commission this past week, where the chair of the Arts Commission couldn't be there, but wanted to attend virtually at a special meeting, but I told them that then we need to go with the vice chair of the Arts Commission, who would actually be physically present in the location that was posted here, the location that was posted for the meeting. So all of those little nuances we can work through and make recommendation. In fact, for the entire section, if the council's amenable, we could probably write a draft for your review when we go through it that night, try to cover all of these points so that you guys can give your input and up and down.
Mr. Circo, did you have something?
Yeah, I was curious when we were talking about that. Now, if we had to go to an impromptu meeting, the weather's bad, and you can actually get a hold of the council and the mayor, and had enough for a quorum to do that, if it was important to do that on any given night. But you couldn't really vote. If you're not in a building in presence, you can't really vote. If you're on the virtual meeting, can you take votes and roll calls and do that still?
As long as we've been able to notice it up effectively and appropriately, basically 24 hours notice that it's been a change of location, just the same way we did before, it would be a roll call vote on the Zoom meeting.
And we can do that, and if we could get a quorum, if it's an emergency meeting and we want to do it, we can, as long as we had a quorum, we could actually set something like that up. Right.
Mr. Holman?
I just think, to Mr. Fearborn's point, Councilmember Circo, was the intent would be that there would have to be a central location listed for the meeting. We wouldn't necessarily, if it were a situation where 4 of us were going to have to attend virtually, there still has to be a central location with probably some staff and probably some type of presiding officer at a minimum. Is that what you were
That is
saying?
correct, sir.
And then
And a place for
the public to attend.
critical that the public be able to attend, and so, yeah.
Anything else? If not, could you pass that around?
I'll have the remainder of the handouts at the conclusion of the meeting, Your Honor. I appreciate the council's indulgence on the educational opportunity here this evening and look forward to making any changes that you might have from it.
Okay.
And again, I want to commend the council as well. As the city attorney, I have the opportunity to participate in an MMAA listserv that I see pop up 3 or 4 questions every day, and every day I see those questions pop up with council members that have done items that make them question, and I am grateful that I have not had to address that. So thank you all.
Thank you, sir. And then, so the last item on the agenda is the board and commission appointments. I've passed out to you the reappointments of 2 for the Planning and Zoning Commission. Both are willing to serve again in their roles, and potentially in a different capacity from within the makeup of the commission itself. I won't get into that any further. I have to wait and see how the vote turns out there. And then the Arts Commission, this person is replacing another individual who's, while their term has expired, is supposed to expire in '22, they've not attended a meeting in the last year. So we will be replacing that person with the one that I'm nominating. Any questions? Yes, Mr. Holman.
Just one, is Jessica, is that Bob's wife or some relation? Because Bob Berry was on.
Yes.
Thank you.
There you go. Any questions? If not, do we have any reason to go into executive session?
We do not, sir.
All right, then we're done for this